Hello, everyone. Welcome back. In the part two of this series, we are going to focus more on the luxury industry. But just to give you a little bit of a background for those who have started watching this part rather than the first part, first and foremost, we'll include a link in the description of the first video. And today, we are going to focus more on the implications of behavioral biases, the biases that we encounter in purchase decisions, and we are going to focus more on the luxury industry. To give you a background, yesterday we had discussed what are the behavioral biases, what is the behavioral bias that influences our purchase decisions, what is the system one, system two kind of thinking, how does our conscious and subconscious affiliations play into what we buy. Today, we are going to focus on behavioral biases and their implications specifically for the luxury industry. We're going to go through the purchase decision model, and then we're going to focus on how emotions play an important role in purchasing of the luxury products. Finally, we'll see how scarcity within the luxury industry of the products that are supposed to be available for all consumers but are released in small quantities plays a role in buying. And then we are going to end with how store experiences and advertising and museums are playing an important role in how luxury brands position themselves. With that background, let's dive in. As we have mentioned before, and as you also know, that luxury brands or the luxury products are not really a logical purchase. They are much more of an emotional purchase. Emotions are much more of a deciding factor in the luxury purchases. With this, let's see what the purchase decision model is. Traditional consumer behavior would normally approach the purchase intent in a five-step strategy, but the luxury purchases have a stronger than average bias towards the emotions, and this makes the purchase decision process model work in a much more limited way. We start with the recognition of need. When we're talking about a need, especially when buying luxury products, the need can be linked to either of the two things. It can be linked to either fitting in or standing out. When we're talking about fitting in, it's the bandwagon effect, wherein you want to feel part of a group, you want to buy what everyone else has. But when you are talking about standing out, it's more of a snob effect, wherein you don't want to buy what everybody else has. You want to buy something very, very unique. And this leads us how to differentiate the consumer segments. Yesterday, we had talked about the aspirational and the dressed for the part segment of the consumer of the luxury consumers. Now, these are more affected by the bandwagon effect, but the true lux shopper is more affected by the snob effect. This brings us to research. Now, the research stage is where the consumers collect data and information and identify what type of products will get the job done. Now, but the research in the luxury industry is very challenging because the concept of luxury is intertwined with scarcity and exclusivity. As a result, a lot of the information that is made available in other categories is not really available for luxury products. It's very intangible and unseen. So, how does the consumer evaluate the alternatives? Evaluation of alternatives is also challenging because, first and foremost, luxury brands are few, they don't lend themselves to easy comparison. Each luxury brand has a very clear and defined brand identity, and this means that there is no apples to apples comparison between two luxury brands. How can you compare an LV with an Hermes or an Hermes with a Chanel or an Hermes with a Dior? So, what does this lead us to? In the sense, a customer can easily identify the points of parity, but for a consumer, it is very difficult to understand the points of differentiation. So, that is where it's much more challenging when evaluating alternatives. Bringing us to the purchase decision. Now, this is a graph that we have talked about in our other videos also, especially when we are talking about the foundations of marketing, the foundations of strategy. This is the consumer journey model. Understanding the consumer journey model is a little tough for most brands. And with the addition of digital, it has added so many touch points into the equation that it is becoming very difficult to attribute like what led to the purchase, what led to awareness. It's becoming a little difficult, so we'll talk about that kind of attribution in another video of ours. Coming back to the luxury and the behavioral biases. Now, luxury brands have had to find a way to navigate between awareness that explodes because of the digital content and at the same time avoid overexposure. Traditionally, the luxury brands have focused on experience of selling via the stores by providing in-store experience that leaves the customer mesmerized and provide for essential models of purchase intent, planned, and impulse buying. And this leads us to the post purchase stage. At this point, the customers have bought the product and are experiencing the brand promise. In this context, we need to remind ourselves that the post purchase experience is entirely subjective as it is connected to the social validation of the luxury product. Luxury is about exclusivity. And so the perception of uniqueness and scarcity are really important factors in the post purchase stage because that is how the consumers will keep feeling. And what brands try to do is that they try and operate to maximize the positive experience or the positive outcome at this stage. This is where most of the other consumer segments kind of leave the consumers on their own. There are very few brands which are providing the kind of post purchase experience that luxury brands provide these days. So there is really no comparison. This is where luxury brands excel on the process of selling and the post purchase experience, the post purchase taking care of the customer. Again, it's all about the emotions in luxury. So when a purchase is purely logical, it is wherein you can evaluate attributes. When a purchase is driven by emotions, it's wherein you just want the product because you want the product, and there it can be either due to bandwagon effect, it can be either due to snob effect. But then there are sometimes the purchase has a mixture of the two, and mostly it is a mixture of the two. No matter how much you want a product or a service, you're always going to do a bit of evaluation. But what happens is that in some kind of purchases, especially in luxury purchases, you lean more towards your emotions than towards the logical side. So, for the logic driven purchases, if the customers act on grounds of logic, the decision is to buy based on a comparison of benefits and costs. And ideally, in a logical decision, customers weigh each attribute and the reasons as to why the product should be bought or why it should not be bought based on the principle of maximizing value and minimizing the cost, maximizing the benefits and minimizing the cost. In luxury, the model that these customers follow is the model of planned purchases. We talked about this in our first video. The planned purchases, where the customers are those who will be more likely to follow the traditional approach to purchase decisions, making it more of a cost benefit analysis. But when it is an emotion driven purchase, the customers will buy on grounds of emotion that are subject to gut feeling that bypasses their rational reasoning. This gut feeling is the reaction that a brand is able to summon in the customer because of its branding, because of its brand identity, its positioning, and the brand communication. A strong brand strategy helps the luxury brands maximize this opportunity to convert customers who are susceptible to this shopping dynamic and convert a higher volume of the more impulsive buyers. This brings us to scarcity and luxury. Now, this is something that the luxury brands excel in. The way that the brands do this is by creating scarcity and by making sure that the supply is always less than the demand. This is seen most prominently in almost all collaborations. For example, the Louis Vuitton and Supreme collaboration, which is in today's world, it is also known as modern collectibles. Nike and Dior collaboration, the Tiffany and Patek Philippe collaboration. And the example that I wanted to share with you, which I found was the best example of scarcity and luxury, was the Bulgari NFTs, wherein you purchase a Bulgari NFT and you are able to wear it in the virtual environment only 3 times a year. The images that I've shared with you here are of the Bulgari NFTs. Moving towards the purchase process, the store experience of the luxury. My apologies for the ad your text here. So another imperative for the luxury brands is the focus on the store experience, which resonates with the brand identity and captures the essence of the brand. For example, this checkered floor that we saw in this slide, as well as in the last slide here, it is how Prada distinguishes itself. So many brands also have renowned architecture and interior designers for their flagship stores, and it's a part of providing the kind of store experience that they want their customers to remember. In fact, this translates to higher volumes by sales by moving customers from system 2 to system 1. System 2 is logical, system 1 is emotional. And this initiates more impulsive purchases. Another example here is the Chanel example, wherein all Chanel stores have Chanel number 5 fragrance sprayed in the stores. And this was the first fragrance that was launched by the founder Coco Chanel. And this adds to the storytelling and the mystique of the product, the ambience, and the brand identity of the brand. This brings us to advertising and luxury. Most luxury brands use heritage, storytelling, craftsmanship in their advertising building, and the founder's vision and passage of the brand through the centuries. And emphasizing the made in country factor, for example, the leather shoes and the bags in Italy and the watches in Germany and Switzerland. One of my favorite examples of this is the Patek Philippe one, wherein you have advertisements which say that you don't buy a Patek Philippe, you merely look after it for the next generation, which kind of lends customers to think that these are not products, these are actually heirlooms that need to be passed on to the next generation. Another example that I wanted to discuss with you was that of the Rolls Royce. It has distinguished itself by saying that it's one of one. This is a very old advert of Rolls Royce wherein it says that at 60 miles an hour, the loudest voice that you see, that you hear, is of the clock ticking. But what's interesting is how Rolls Royce sells itself. Now, it uses the anchoring technique that we discussed in our last video, and it uses it in the most innovative ways. They advertise at boat shows, and in comparison of the boats that cost millions, the price tag of 500,000, that is half a mil, starts looking a much more reasonable bet compared to the boats. Now it brings us to the museums and luxury. This is where the luxury brands excel. They take advertising, storytelling, experiential marketing one step further, and in order to leverage the full appeal of heritage, many of the luxury brands have been creating museums. A museum for a luxury brand is an ultimate celebration of its heritage values associated with the brand, and it forms a long term value creation and a tool for consumer education. Museums are investments which allow growing the intangible assets of the luxury and prestige which is associated with the brand, and they also link that to art. It's not just a product anymore, it's actually a part of heritage, passage of time, and how it has become art through all the centuries. So this brings us to the conclusion, and in conclusion, it can be said that the luxury brands do recognize the strong impact that emotions and impulses play in the luxury industry and in the buying of luxury products, and they are able to reap the benefits that come from the correct communication of their collections and of their products. Brands that are able to develop persuasive narrative and legendary upbringing are able to establish a very convincing positioning strategy. And a couple of brands excel at this. We'll end with a few examples and then we'll follow this up with definite case studies. For example, the next case study that you can look forward to is of the Hermes case study. How Hermes uses price positioning to distinguish itself from the fact that you can buy Hermes slides for approximately a couple of $100 to not being able to buy Birkin unless and until you are on a wait list, which also lends itself to being being placed there by the luxury brands itself. So in all, you can look forward to a couple of case studies. For example, Hermes. We will also talk about LVMH, especially the marketing that the LVMH group as a whole does, and we'll follow it up with a couple of quiet luxury brands. For example, Brunello Cucinelli. We also wanted to talk about Vacheron Constantine. So there are a lot of things that are coming up. So do subscribe to this channel and stay tuned in. Thank you.